Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with another installment of the Iron Bomber's Guide to the DCS Galaxy. Today we're not talking so much about bombing or even weapons deployment. Today we're taking a little detour into the world of navigation aids and instrument landing approaches. This is mostly motivated by the fact that I finally picked up a copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and I've been flying it a fair bit. And one of the things I noticed about the flying that I do in Microsoft Flight Simulator is that it's much more, procedural than what I do in DCS. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, I and a lot of other people, it seems, spend a lot more time focused on instrument navigation and on practicing various techniques for performing instrument approaches to landing and that sort of thing. And it's pretty clear that this is one of the things that Microsoft has concentrated on. Especially in the high-end aircraft like the jetliners, which I actually haven't flown yet. But you really need to practice this kind of thing if you're going to fly those kinds of aircraft. But even at the low end, a lot of the aircraft are equipped with some form of glass cockpit and some pretty sophisticated autopilots that let you practice instrument flying techniques and procedures. So I've done a fair bit of flying like that in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And so I decided to maybe experiment a little in DCS with the systems available for instrument navigation and landing. And there aren't a lot of videos out there on the subject, so I thought maybe I'd make one. So here we are. I'm going to be flying today in the trusty A-4, although lots of other planes in DCS do have navigation aids, and some of the more modern jets have much more sophisticated implementations than the Scooter does. But in classic fashion, the Scooter is basic enough that it makes it easy to demonstrate the principles without a lot of extra computer between you and the results. So I kind of like testing it in the Scooter. I would also point out that the C101 is a great choice for practicing some of this stuff, particularly if you pick up the GPS downloadable content module. And if anyone is interested in seeing a C101 navigation video, let me know. So, but before we get started, let's talk a little bit about the concept behind modern instrument navigation, and then let's take a look at the various nav aids that are actually present in DCS, and then we'll go out and fly a quick navigation exercise flight to see how they work in practice. Modern radio-based nav aids really started to develop during the Second World War, and basically for two reasons. First was the issue of aircraft being able to find their targets, but then also their ability to find their home airfields once they'd completed their missions. And this was not a trivial exercise at all, especially in the carrier battles in the Pacific. And getting it wrong was often a fatal mistake. And sometimes whole squadrons of aircraft who followed their leader did so right until their own untimely demise. But there's also another reason for developing these techniques, which is frankly the reason I think that they've continued to develop in civilian use, and that was actually traffic management. World War II dramatically increased the number of aircraft trying to use a given landing facility at one time, and the standard technique of having aircraft just join the pattern and then land in turn, I think quickly began to add significant amounts of time to any mission. And it also significantly increased the odds of a mishap or a misadventure, especially when pilots were fatigued or worse, wounded, when they came home after a long mission. So even in World War II, serious investigation began into techniques for not only directing aircraft to the airport, but for also arranging for them to approach the airport from the right direction and at the right height to land without resorting to joining a traffic pattern. I think it also became very important to arrange for this to happen in less than perfect weather conditions. And this, of course, became the main objective of civilian traffic management systems, as the number of airliners flying exploded in the 50s and 60s, and they got larger and they got faster. Having them circle the airport to land was really not a viable option. So the modern approach to instrument navigation is basically centered on those two goals. Get planes lined up on their runways far enough away from the airport that there's no need for them to fly a traffic pattern, and do it regardless of how bad the visibility is so that the weather, as much as possible, doesn't affect the process. In fact, for, decades now, civil air traffic has been using the concept of the precision approach, where the navigation information is so precise that the autopilot is actually capable of flying the aircraft down to some decision height minimum before the human pilot actually takes over and completes the landing. And that decision height is often as little as 200 feet off the ground. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's pretty easy to set up and fly these precision approaches. It's not nearly so common in DCS. I've never flown a precision approach in DCS, and I'm not even sure they're completely supported. If they are, it would be in one of the more modern jets with a fully functional autopilot. If anyone out there has tried it, I'd appreciate you letting me know. So today, we're going to concentrate on using the instruments to help us fly our approach, but we're going to fly the whole approach manually. So just quickly before we get started, let's take a look at the kind of nav aids that are actually available in DCS. First of all, there's the automatic directional beacon, or ADB. This is basically just a radio transmitter that you can tune to and track, and it allows you to fly directly towards it. This technology has been around since the 30s, and it was pretty much the state of the art in the Second World War. The issue with the ADB is that it tells you how to find the beacon, but it doesn't give you any information about how far away it is or how to approach it from the right direction to, say, align with a runway. Now, the second problem is solved by a technology known as VHF omni-ranging, or VOR. A VOR not only provides you with guidance that allows you to fly towards it, but it also allows you to select a direction from which you wish to approach, and this is usually referred to as the VOR radial. Once the radial is set, the VOR will provide you guidance cues that help you fly around the beacon until you're on the right radial, and then to turn in and follow the radial to the VOR. This has obvious benefits if you're trying to line up on a given runway. It's still not enough information to really help you set up an approach, though. For that, you need to know how far away you are from the airport so that you can get on an appropriate glide slope. So an instrument was developed that can be added to a VOR, and it's known as Distance Measuring Equipment, or DME. And in civilian use, stations that have both of these capabilities are known as VOR DMEs, but in military use, they're known as TACAN, a term that I'm sure you've probably heard before. So a TACAN provides you with all the information you need to line up on a runway at a distance, and with a little bit of mental math to manage your descent so that you arrive at the threshold at 0 feet AGL. Better yet would be an instrument that takes all of the guesswork out of the process by providing horizontal and vertical alignment guidance at the same time. And that is the Instrument Landing System. The ILS provides a horizontal localizer that guides you to the runway along the correct radial, and a vertical localizer that guides you to a constant 3-degree glide slope. As ILS systems have become more accurate and more reliable, they have become the basis for the precision approach system, where their information is fed directly to the autopilot, which flies the approach automatically. The biggest issue with ILS is that it's relatively short range, typically 10 to 15 miles. So while it can provide terminal guidance, it's still necessary to use some other nav aids to get to the right spot in space to successfully acquire and follow the ILS guidance. And since the ILS localizer signals are pretty narrow, you have to arrive at the ILS outer limit already pretty well aligned, or it really won't do you much good. So, for our practice today, we won't be doing a precision approach. Instead, we're going to fly a manual approach using TACAN for the initial approach, then switching to ILS when we get in range, and then finally finishing the approach with good old VFR techniques, which in the A-4 means looking out the window and watching the AOA indexer. Now, there is one more little piece of information that'll come in handy as we do this, and that is something I call the 3-degree glide slope rule of thumb. And this basically says that in order to be on a 3-degree glide slope, we basically want to be up about 1,000 feet for every 3 nautical miles back we are from the airport. So using data provided by TACAN, we can ensure that we approach and acquire the ILS glide slope localizer when we're close to the correct glide slope. So the plan for today is to take off from Batumi, fly straight out and up to, 10 or 12,000 feet, then turn to the north, acquire the signal for the Kutaisi TACAN, approach Kutaisi along the runway radial, which is 67 degrees for anyone who's keeping score, and then begin our descent to intercept a 3-degree glide slope at around 20 nautical miles, which should bring us to the ILS guidance when it becomes available at about the right spot, and then we'll eventually follow the ILS down until we have the runway firmly in sight, and we'll finish the landing manually. Now, the weather is not particularly bad, broken cloud layer at about 8,000 feet, but it's bad enough that it will keep us from seeing the airport until we're within ILS range. So we will definitely need the instruments to manage our approach, even if we won't need them to actually complete the landing. Okay, here we are in our trusty A-4 Skyhawk, just getting the nav edge set up here on the ground before we go. TACAN channel we want is 44. Turn the volume up a little so we can hear when we require it. Put it on transmit receive. The ILS channel that we want is 12. You can figure that out by checking the flight. So we set this to 12, flip the switch a bit for a second, and turn it back. So now our nav aids are set up, and we are ready to taxi. The lights up here. Okay, as I said before, the basic flight plan is going to be to taxi out to the runway, take off, and go straight out to something above the cloud layer, probably 10,000 or more. And by then, hopefully, we will be able to hear the Kutaisi TACAN, and then we will fly the TACAN to a point where we'll be able to pick up the ILS. So we want to approach Kutaisi along the runway radial, which, like I said, is 67 degrees. And then hopefully when we get close enough to acquire the ILS, it will bring us right down that heading even more accurate. So here we are, just holding short, get the flaps down, get some trim put on, and we'll head out to the runway. So as I said, the weather isn't bad here. 8,000 broken, doesn't look bad from the ground, but as you'll see when we get up there, there's no way that we could actually find the airport, and certainly not find the runway from above the cloud layer. And even below the cloud layer, the shadows and everything will make it kind of difficult. So we will, the instruments will be helping us with this approach. It's not like we couldn't make a VFR approach today, but the instruments will make it a lot easier, and that's really all I'm trying to show how to do the instrument approach, not to do an approach in weather that requires the instrument. All right, looks like we're ready. Let's head down the runway. Yeah, looks like rotation speed right around there. Off the runway. The forward pressure gets some of that trim off, the wheels up, and the flaps down. And now it's just a question of climbing out and waiting to see when we pick up the climb. So, actually one thing we're going to notice when we acquire the TACAN here that we can actually tell right now by looking at the PDHI, the bearing distance and heading indicator in the A-4, doesn't actually support full VOR functionality in that it doesn't let you specify a radian. So, in a modern VOR, there would be a knob that we can turn that would tell the instrument what radial we wanted to approach along. Well, we don't get that functionality in the A-4, so we are still going to have to set the VOR radial mentally and make sure that we're approaching along a radial that's around 67 degrees. Okay, there is the TACAN. Let's just get up above the clouds here before we do anything dramatic. Turn the volume down though so it won't drive us nuts. So we're coming up through the clouds and coming up through 10,000 feet. And we'll level off. And we'll get ourselves ourselves set up to follow the tack in here. Let's get our autopilot on. Good. And now we'll just get ourselves set up for cruise here, pull back on the power a little bit. We don't need to be going 400 knots. And once we have everything stabilized, we will start our navigation. So let's start turning to the north. And let's take a look down here. We're going to get the switch set right. Where is it? Okay, let's finish our turn and then I'll get that sorted out. I don't think I have the switch in the right position, but I need to get turned here to north, and we can worry about getting the tack-hand sorted out. We'll roll out here level above the clouds, going to the north. We know Katie's off to the right now. Let me get the switch in the right position. That's the right position. That's the tack-hand position. Just got to pull up a little bit here, level off. While we're going back down through the clouds. So you can see that our bearing to Kutaisi is a little bit less than 60 degrees. We want it to be around 70 when we turn in. We also have plenty of distance to go yet, so we have lots of time to get ourselves in. So we're just going to keep heading roughly north here. And as we come up to, as Kutaisi starts coming close to 7 degrees off our right, 70 degrees and off our right, then we'll turn into the right and try to approach it along that 70-degree radius. We're not too worried about really being hyper accurate about that, because the whole point is that once we acquire the ILS localizer, somewhere around, I don't know, 15 miles hopefully, we'll have lots of time to sweeten up our alignment, and the ILS will put us right on the center line of the runway, not just aimed in the right direction. So it's really just a matter of flying north until we can read from the TACAN that we're in about the right position. Still got lots of range, so we're going to stay above the clouds for now. It's really just a matter of flying until we're on the right radial to Kutaisi. Now, as you can see, we can see down through the clouds, but really we'd have no hope of trying to figure out where the airport was, and certainly no hope of trying to approach it from the right direction without using instruments. Okay, we can tighten it up just a little bit more here. Just want to come slowly around so that we're eventually approaching Kutaisi along that 70 degree radius. So we're rolling out here, and we're flying directly at Kutaisi. We're still a little bit narrow of that 70 degrees. We turned a little bit soon, but like I said, we don't need to be hyper concerned about the accuracy. So probably, we should aim off just a little bit to the left and keep them coming around a little bit, but it's nothing dramatic at this point. Now we just need to start watching the range. Just as I said, we want to get down using that 3 degree glide slope rule of thumb. We want to be down to around 6,000 feet by the time we get to 20 nautical miles. And we also want to be thinking at that point about starting to take the speed down to something under 200, so we're ready to drop the flaps here. So we'll probably bring the air brakes in somewhere around 20 nautical miles. We'll see how we're doing on the airspeed. As somebody pointed out after one of my videos a while back, we do want to make this landing with the air brakes out. The A-4 is designed to land with the air brakes out so that the engine is up, it's near 70-80% power. Navy jets like the A-4 are not designed to land at idle. They're designed to land at fairly high power. So that's how we want to approach. I'm just aimed a little bit left of Kutaisi. Just want to keep increasing that angle slightly because it's still a little bit less than the 70 that we want. And I think it's time now to start losing some altitude so we can get down to that 6,000 feet by 20 nautical miles because we're still up pretty high. Start descending. Not really worrying too much about taking much speed off at this point. Still got lots of distance to go. And now we'll come back around to the right a little bit. We're closer, getting closer and closer to that 70 degree mark where we want to be. Right, getting down close to 10,000 feet, starting to get down into the top of the clouds now. Pretty good alignment, and now it's really just a matter of getting down to that beginning of that glide slope altitude of about 6,000 feet by around 20 nautical miles. Just need to keep the wings level and keep descending through the soup here. And there we are coming out of it at about 8,000 feet. Now if we squinted really hard, we might be able to see the runway at this distance, but we really don't need to be worrying about that too much at this point. The instruments are going to give us a better idea of how to fly the approach than here's what was put at this range. And a pretty good alignment. And we're coming down to that 6,000 feet at around 20 nautical miles, but it's probably time to start knocking some speed off. Over the nose, see if I can actually see the runway. I think I can see it just yet. Right. We've gained a little bit of altitude with that. So pull the speed back even farther. Here the slats coming out now. Yeah, still need to lose a little bit of altitude. Oh, there we go. We've got the ILS horizontal localizer. The needle clicked into the middle of our artificial horizon there, and so it's a little bit to the right. So we want to aim a little bit to the right. I'll put the air brakes out now because we are still a little bit higher than I'd like, and we still need to lose some speed. So we'll concentrate on getting down a little bit. The next sort of checkpoint is we want to be at around 4,500 feet at 15 nautical miles. We're a little bit above glide slope right now. We're a little bit to the left, so we're coming back to the right. And we'll just wait and see if we can get that vertical localizer on screen here. Still losing height. Speed's back to about 150. Probably don't want to go any lower than that at this point in the approach. Still a little bit high. But we seem to be lined up pretty well. Start adding a bit of power back. We don't want to drop too much speed. A little bit further to the right to get back on alignment here. So now we can stop. Oh, there we got the vertical line. I'll say we can stop looking at the TACAN for alignment now. We're going to use the ILS, and we're also going to use the glide slope indicator. So we're a little bit low now. Lost just a little bit too much, right? But we don't really need to climb. We just need to kind of hold our altitude or slow our rate of descent. Slow it a little bit more than that because we're losing the glide slope even more. And really you just want to watch the glide slope come slowly back in the middle, and then as it joins up, then we want to keep it in the center. Speed's not bad at this point in the approach. We probably don't want to be too slow. And we're basically going to try and keep slowing our descent, get that glide slope coming back to the middle. Alignment's good. And then somewhere around 5 nautical miles, we're going to want to drop the flaps in the gear. And then somewhere inside there, we're going to want to pick up the runway and start using the runway as a cue more than we start using the instruments. I can see the runway now in the middle of the screen. We're not looking too bad. Without the help of the instruments, I wouldn't be able to tell that I'm actually too low, so they're helping. So again, we're just raising the nose a little, keep the speed up though. With the glide slope indicator coming down slowly, so we're slowly getting back to the glide slope, and that's really all we're worried about. The vertical needle, or the vertical needle in the middle, which shows our horizontal alignment, will stay right down the middle of the runway. Glide slope's coming down now. Speed's pretty good. At this distance out, I find one of my tendencies was to get too slow too early, and then it takes forever. And the A4 doesn't fly great when it's slow, so I think it's better to keep the speed up a little farther into the approach here. Once we get the gear and the flaps down, we'll go towards our landing speed. Glide slope's continuing to come down. Runway looks good. So it's at this point you got to be a little bit careful about, as they call it, task saturation. Watching both needles and the runway and the speed and the distance all at the same time can rapidly become a little bit too much. So I'm going to watching the runway a little bit more than I am the instruments now, and I'm getting the gear down and the flaps down. And so increasingly I'm just going to be watching the runway. I'm watching that AOA indexer, and I'm not too worried about the glide slope indicator. Glide slope says we've gone a little bit high, but I'm really more worried about getting the AOA in the middle. See the runway now, so I don't think I'm going to miss it. So increasingly I'm relying more on the visual cues in the AOA than I am the glide slope. Glide slope says we're too low, but AOA says we're pretty good. Runway looks pretty good to me. Speed looks pretty good. So now I'm pretty much fully visual at this point. I can see that the ILS is saying that we're really lower than it would like us to be, but it looks like a pretty good approach to me at this point. I'm just going to hold it right here. They are nice and well lined up. A little slow, need to pull it a little bit faster, get the nose down a little more. But it's a pretty good approach. Runway pretty steady in the display there in the middle of the screen. Good AOA, good speed, good runway. Not really even worrying about what the ILS is telling me. Yeah, I'm liking it. Good AOA, good speed. There's the inner beacon. Up. Liking this approach. Right, turns out if anything it looks like we're a little high, probably could have come back on the power a little. I'll wait till we're over the threshold, cut back the power. We'll actually do a little bit of a flare here, even though the A4 doesn't want it, and we're down. It's just a matter of staying on the runway with the A4's brakes. Right, well there you have it, folks. That was an instrument navigation exercise. We did an instrument approach, although we did a visual landing. I think the combination of all those instruments actually worked pretty well, and just enough clouds to show that it would not be something that you would be able to do without the instruments. We didn't have to find the airfield and fly a traffic pattern around it. Instead, we were able to basically get lined up on the runway far enough out that we could just fly straight in and land, which is really the objective. So even with the A4 that doesn't have the most sophisticated suite of landing instruments, I think you can see that they're actually quite useful. Oops, I'm going by the taxiway I wanted here, just a sec. Let's pull over here, slow down, and get some use out of the A4's nose wheel. Still actually just using the brakes, not using nose wheel steering, but you can get a nice tight turn out of the A4 with the brakes. Just have to get yourself restarted. Anyways, that is the A4 navigation exercise. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more navigation stuff, like I said, in the C-101 or any of the other aircraft, or if you have your own advice about how to use the instrument systems in any of the other aircraft in DCS, feel free to contribute them in the comments. As always, please like the videos and subscribe to the channel. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.